this story is a little bit of a tough one. Last week, I talked about this book that I read, my first day in medium security, and it was called The Beast Within. And for years, I've been searching Wikipedia, I've been searching Amazon, looking for this book. Not that I really want to reread it, but it's just kind of like Hannibal Lecter once said, our scars are the proof that the past was real. I needed to, if not reread that book, I needed to at least have it. I needed to at least see it. But anyway, now we have AI. So I described the book as best as I could to Grok, and Grok came back and said, "Oh, that sounds like Fortune and Men's Eyes," which was a play. I said to Grok, "I've previously told you about the book I read on my first day in medium security. It was from the prison library. It was called The Beast Within. You told me correctly that it was basically Fortune and Men's Eyes, and that prison libraries sometimes carried that sort of book. It was a common practice to repackage previous works and republish them under a different title." And Grok says, "It wasn't universal, but it was routine enough that readers and librarians occasionally encountered the same story under multiple names. If the content matched Fortune and Men's Eyes closely enough for you to recognize it, that's a classic sign of exactly this kind of quiet repackaging." I also asked Grok for a plot synopsis of Fortune and Men's Eyes. I'd say it was easy reading, but it was very, very difficult reading. It was very hard to read that, given the circumstances I was in, and the subject matter. Anyway, the story unfolds almost entirely in a single prison cell and its corridor over the Christmas season, with a cast of 4 young inmates and 1 guard. It's a raw dialogue-driven expose of prison brutality, powerful hierarchies, corruption of the innocent, and the use of sexual violence as a tool of control and survival. Rape and sexual coercion are central themes, portrayed as normalized mechanisms in the all-male reformatory system rather than isolated incidents. Plot summary. Smitty, a naive 17-year-old first-time offender sentenced to 6 months for minor nonviolent offense, often implied as marijuana-related in context, enters the youth reformatory asserting his heterosexuality. He's placed in a cell with 3 others. Okay, so The Beast Within, again, it doesn't exactly copy Fortune and Men's Eyes, because it wasn't written as if it's a youth reformatory, the book that I read. It takes place in an adult prison. Smitty, a naive 17-year-old first-time offender, sentenced to 6 months for a minor I read that, sorry. And he's placed in a cell with 3 others. Rocky, a tough, opportunistic, predatory 19-year-old bully who uses intimidation and offers protection. Mona, a sensitive, poetic, effeminate young man who has emotionally detached as a coping mechanism and is repeatedly victimized. Queenie, a flamboyant, campy homosexual, sometimes read as a partial self-insertion by the author, who navigates the system with defiance, humor, and manipulation. So the reason I know that this is the work, besides the, I'm going to get into to the story in just a moment, but Queenie was absolutely a major character in The Beast Within, as was Smitty. I can't say I remember Rocky per se or Mona per se, but there were characters that kind of fit along those lines. And, and again, this is me reading this book given to me by this guy, Shake, who was the janitor or in charge of supplies. He swept up. He had all the bedding and all this and all that. He collected the laundry. He was kind of the in-house guy, and he loaned me that book. And we'll get into the questions of why he loaned me that book as we go on today. Anyway, well, let's go into the plot. From the start, the cell dynamics revolve around sexual power structures. Inmates explain the unwritten rules to Smitty. New or weak prisoners face constant threats of gang rape, being spread for the whole cell block or becoming public property. Without aligning with a stronger old man for protection, a newcomer risks repeated collective sexual assaults by groups of inmates. This threat is explicit and pervasive, Rape is depicted as a routine tool for dominance, humiliation, and establishing hierarchy, not primarily about desire, but about control in an environment stripped of other outlets. Smitty initially resists, but quickly faces the reality. Rocky positions himself as a protector in exchange for Smitty becoming his subordinate, or bitch. This includes, or kid, as it turns out. This includes performing menial tasks and submitting sexually. The play implies and dramatizes Smitty's forced submission, including sexual acts. In stage production, this is often shown through simulated violence, partial nudity, or intense physical confrontations in the cell. Smitty's resistance crumbles under fear of worse alternatives, gang rape by many others. Rocky treats him as property, demanding ongoing sexual favors. This marks Smitty's rapid loss of innocence and entry into the predatory system. I'm going to stop there. You can go ahead and ask Rock about it. So let me share something with you, because I think for context, it might be important to show you what I looked like when I entered prison. And that's what I looked like. That, the Latherverse people, is my college graduation picture. So imagine looking like that and reading what I just read to you on your first day in prison. And again, for context, and I know I keep repeating myself, I strongly suggest watching chapter 6, because it talks about how I read the book and how I reacted to it. And it leads into what we talk about tonight. But one more thing, before I let go of Fortune in Men's Eyes, here is something from 1969, because, like I said, that play was written in 1967, 1968. Well, Sal Mineo, who my fellow boomers have probably heard of, you might remember him from Rebel Without a Cause and a couple of other movies, actually directed a production of Fortune in Men's Eyes. And I'd like to share with you what he had to say about it. And this is from the Mike Douglas Show. And the other guests, of all people, are Ozzie and Harriet, Ricky Nelson's parents. And some of you might have watched, but again, my fellow boomers might remember the Ozzie and Harriet show.
Our next guest is a very interesting young man. And the last time he was with us, I was away for a couple of days. But I know about him. He's made an international name for himself as an actor, and more recently through his play, Fortune in Men's Eyes, as a director. And Ozzie and Harriet, I know that you're both familiar with this young man's work.
Yes, we know him.
So let's all get together and greet Sal Mineo. How is the play doing in New York?
Fantastic, thank you. It's really doing very well.
Excuse me, for the benefit of those who may not know what the play is about, refresh us, will you?
Basically, it deals with what happens to a 17-year-old boy who's sentenced to prison, and the mental and physical brutality that he's subjected to. It does go on today, and all of this that you see on stage is an accumulation of factual things that have happened in prison. And it's pretty shocking, frankly. And I was very
pleased. There's been a lot of publicity
that,
about it.
Yeah,
about
well,
what's going on in prisons.
as a result of the play, and I think this is one of the areas that I feel very proud of, is that aside from it being an entertaining show and it being theater, it's caused a lot of people to all of a sudden stand up and say, now, wait a minute, is this actually happening in today's prisons? I mean, our kids, kids who are sentenced to very minor, for minor crimes are exposed to this kind of thing, being sent to prison with men that are hardened criminals.
And then the play is making the impact that you thought it would.
It's causing that kind of reaction, which is kind of exciting because you can't turn away from it.
As I mentioned last week, I knew the movie existed. I don't want to watch it. I just don't. It's, and then I watched the trailer. I got a little brave and watched the trailer. So here's the trailer. You might want to skip the next 2 minutes.
Fortune and Men's Eyes. It began as a stage play about conditions in a men's prison, and the view it presented of prison life was frightening and true. Fortune and Men's Eyes is now on film.
One thing, Smitty. Don't ever depend on the guards for protection.
I didn't do anything. He started the whole thing.
He made a mistake. He's going to pay for it. But if you think prison will straighten him out, you've never been to prison. What goes on in prison is a crime. Fortune and Men's Eyes. Rated R.
Well, without further ado, I'm gonna read the written story about what happened on April 5th, 1976. It's a continuation of the story I read last week. And let me get it up on the screen, and we can read it together. And again, this is the first. I'm reading it out loud for the first time. I've never read the story out loud before. So I'm gonna just the last few lines from last week. For those of you who don't want to go back and watch chapter 6, I met that guy Shake, who was the janitor, pretty cool guy. Shook my hand, got me my bedding, got me my slippers, et cetera, and loaned me the book that is the retold version of the repackaged Fortune and Men's Eyes. And by now, you know how terrifying reading that was on my first day there. But a much more graphic description of how I felt about it is in chapter 6. Watch chapter 6. Just again, to summarize it, first time I went to the mess hall, I see this big guy with a Hell's Angels tattoo on his bicep walking up to me. And it turns out that he had tried some of the blotters that I was selling in Albany that I got arrested for. And he's like, whoa, I loved him. That stuff changed my life. Here I was like terrified of him. And it turned out that, he's a new character in the story. Let's put it that way. So I ended last week with, he said he added, come on, Ed, let me buy you dinner. I finally had something to laugh about. I followed him into the mess hall. So that ends the part about April 2nd, 1976. The story goes on. The weekend passed relatively uneventfully. The bed across from mine was assigned to a wannabe cowboy from upstate New York who was locked up for committing a petty burglary. His name was Charlie Davis. They'd moved him from the open area upstairs. There'd been some sort of incident causing the move, but Charlie didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask any questions. Charlie spent a lot of his time doing glass painting, which seemed to be the hobby of choice in Building 40. Inmates took a pane of glass and laid it on top of an image. The outline of the image was then traced with India ink. The glass was then removed from the image, and the ink outline was now filled in with enamel paint. Charlie had made some extraordinary, if unoriginal, paintings. Shake happened by while Charlie was showing me some of them. He pulled Charlie aside, and they had some sort of discussion. It didn't appear to be a friendly chat, but I tried not to pay too much attention to it and kept looking at Charlie's artwork. The conversation didn't last long. Charlie walked off. Shake walked back in. Shake must have noticed that I'd taken an interest in Charlie's glass paintings and asked if I was interested in trying it. When I nodded affirmatively, he told me to meet him upstairs to get some art supplies so I can get started. I brought the book with me, handed it back to him, and thanked him. I hadn't read the middle chapters and didn't feel a need to. We discussed some of the events in the book. Shake's point of view seemed to differ a bit from mine, but that made sense. Shake was 3.5 years into a 5-year sentence, and I was a new arrival. Okay, let me skip ahead 3 days. Dannemora, New York, April 5th, 1976, 10 a.m. Now it was Monday, and almost everybody was out on their work crews. Sid Ehrlich was sick. Sid Ehrlich, by the way, I talk about him. Sid Ehrlich is a character. Sid Ehrlich plays a part in stories to come. So this is your introduction to Sid Ehrlich. Sid Ehrlich was sick and he was asleep. His bed was in the lower section out in the main room. Sid was a former New York City police lieutenant who lost his job and his freedom after he gunned down a pimp and a prostitute in Lower Manhattan. He had approached me over the weekend to suggest that I start attending Jewish services on Saturday mornings. He was also an outspoken racist and made that clear in our first conversation. He pointed out that he had seen me talking to Sheikh and told me my time would go easier if I stayed away from the black guys, except he didn't call them black guys. I wasn't sure if he was advising me or threatening me. I didn't really respond. Other than Sid, there were just 3 others in Building 40 that morning. There was one guard on duty, but he was at the station upstairs, which made no sense, or perfect sense, since there were no inmates upstairs. Sheikh was around somewhere because his job was upkeeping Building 40, and I was there. I still had not been assigned to a crew, so I was sitting on my bed with a deck of cards playing high-stakes solitaire. But by the way, yeah, I played solitaire obsessively, and my deal with whatever force of nature I was betting against was, okay, if I win this game, I'll be out of my parole date. If I lose this game, I'm going to do fine. You know, I was like making mental bets with my freedom over the solitaire game to make the solitaire game more interesting to me. So when I say I was sitting on my bed with a deck of cards playing high-stakes solitaire, in my head, that's exactly what I was doing. Sheikh walked in. I was happy to see him. Hey, I said, how'd you get a name like Sheikh anyway? Oh, he replied, that's the way I play hoop. He did a little basketball court pantomime, and he said, I shake, and then I bake. So they call me Shake and Bake. His real name was David Bowman. I found out over the weekend that he was doing a pound, which meant 5 years for robbing a liquor store at gunpoint. He saw what I was doing. Solitaire, he exclaimed. Shit, that's boring. Come on, man, let's go play some chess. Sure, why not? I said. I played second board on my high school chess team. Yes. I was on my high school chess team. Alan Axelrod was the captain, first board. We played in the tournament. I was on my high school chess team, which meant I went into that place with the attitude that I could wipe the floor with anybody over a chessboard. So Sheikh wanted to play chess? Sure, we'll play some chess. I got you, chess. I had played second board on my high school chess team and had spent many very late nights in the dorm in college playing chess while stoned on acid. I was no grandmaster, but I was sure I could beat any guy in this place in my sleep. His bed was in one of the side rooms downstairs. We passed a snoring Sid as we walked from my exit corridor to his room. Sheikh set the board up while I placed chairs on opposite sides of the bed. It felt good to be playing chess. It took my mind off of being locked up. And Sheikh played a whole lot better than I thought he would. A good match I was up for, surprising as it was, but the thought of losing to Sheikh, as cool as he was intolerable. And he had indeed gained a positional and tactical advantage. It was time to really focus on the game, so I barely heard him when he said out of nowhere, you know, you have really big hips. I threw him an autopilot reply and said, yeah, I guess it makes it real easy to fart. It's an exact quote, by the way. My mind was really on the chess game. Before I made my next move, he said, you know, I want you to be my kid. The red flags I'd successfully ignored up to now were beginning to impair my view of the chessboard. But no, this was impossible. Sheikh was the one who loaned me that book. Why would he have me read a beyond horror story about something he was going to try to do himself? Without looking up, trying to seem as casual as possible, I asked, your kid? What does being your kid mean? He said, you know, it means I'll take care of you. I continued to stare at the chessboard. There was no way I was going to make eye contact. I needed to be cool. No question about it. Just be cool and I'd be okay. Sheikh had told me that himself 3 days earlier. Just be cool, you'll have nothing to worry about. The problem was I had no idea of just what comprised being cool in this particular situation. Some words came to me and I smiled as I said them without looking up. Hey, that's really nice of you, but I think I'll be able to take care of myself. Cool. Yeah, right. No way the red flags could be ignored now. They were flying and flapping as if it were 1938 Moscow on Stalin's birthday. But this made no sense. Other than Jimmy, Shake was as much of a friend as I had made in a short time in this place, and he'd warned me about this by lending me the book. Hell, we even talked about the events depicted in the book over the past weekend. No way he could have missed the fact that I was horrified by what I'd read. Again, why would he warn me about something he was going to try to do himself? Maybe the book excited him. I tried for a moment to look at the story in the book from a sexual predator's point of view, but I couldn't keep that particular train of thought on its tracks. Maybe he was hoping the book excited me. No way, no fucking way. Maybe he loaned me the book to illustrate what would happen if I didn't give in to him. Bingo! It was the only thing that made sense. Give in to this or have it forced on me. Probably by a lot more than just Shake. Now, again, mind you, I had just read The Beast Within, and it talks about how if you don't have a protector, you're going to be tossed to the masses for a gang rape. So, give in to this or have it forced on me. Probably by a lot more than just Shake. A third choice. There's always a third choice. I'd always been able to escape duality. I searched for the non-obvious. And then it came to me. Shake was just messing with me. This whole conversation was simply a ploy to distract me and make me lose the chess game. Well, nice try, bud. It ain't going to work. Ha! Good one, though. Never would have thought of that. I chuckled out loud, but my eyes never left the chessboard. So I thought, all I need to do now is come up with a brilliant move. It was right at that moment that Shake stood up. I didn't really see him stand up. I just knew he did. I guess I heard him. I don't really remember. What I did hear, what I do remember very distinctly, is the sound of the click as he shut the door to the room. To be continued. So tune in next Thursday if you want to hear the rest of the story. And that's it for the story for this week. I'm not going to touch politics. I jotted down a bunch of notes, things to talk about. I'm just going to say one thing. I want to be the voice of reason. You know, I definitely feel a certain way about certain things, but I want to be the voice of reason. So let me just say one thing about this. The moderates, whether you're a left-leaning moderate or a right-leaning moderate, you have more in common with your fellow moderates on the other side of the line than you do with the extremists on your own side of the line. And there's been a lot of bad blood that I've personally experienced with so-called moderates who don't agree with certain political stances I've taken. We need to get over that because things are gearing up to be pretty crazy here. This war in Iran, I'm not even going to get into that right now. But the extremists are loving this because the extremists are the ones who are caught. It's the old divide and conquer. And the moderates need to be united. Whether, you know, there are certain issues we need to just kind of agree to disagree on to keep the crazies out of power. And I hope I can at least get agreement on that we need to be rational, we need to be reasonable, and we need to be truthful. And yeah. But yeah, that was a hell of a thing. Sorry about the cliffhanger. That's one hell of a cliffhanger. If you think you got to wait a week to see what happens next, imagine how I felt in that particular moment. I'll read the rest. I'll read the next chapter next. I didn't write these things with a continuity in mind. I was just writing things as I thought of stories. They're written in no particular order, but they're being told chronologically. And I don't know what, if anything, gets done with this. We'll see. We'll see. But for now, I'm just going to say the words. The boomer has blathered.